Well, thank you for joining us. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone to the webinar. I can see that we still have folks joining us. We would like to start with a quick introduction of myself and Jason. And I just wanted to mention that we are thankful for your time in joining this webinar. That will provide some additional information on the upcoming merger between UP and NS. And with this, we would like to proceed. Jason, if you don't mind, I would appreciate your introduction.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Miller. Sorry for being a second late. I just finished teaching MBA Integrated Logistics a couple sections, so running back to my office. So I'm the Eli Broad Professor in Supply Chain Management here. A lot of my research really focuses on the for-hire trucking sector, safety, productivity, market dynamics, employment, turnover, and things of that sort. Um, but then more broadly, kind of as a transportation economist, looking at, sort of broader freight demand, which obviously very much touches on rail, and getting into, a lot of issues at the intersection of supply chain and economics, tariffs being another key example.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. My name is Val, or Valerie Kucherenko. I'm a director of railway education at the Center for Railway Research and Education here at Michigan State University, Eli Broad College of Business. I spent a number of years with Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway based out of Toronto, primarily in the pricing and marketing side before joining MSU in August last year. And my background is primarily international intermodal, including 3PL, container shipping, and the railroad experience with Canadian Pacific. With this, we would like to proceed. First of all, I wanted to highlight that this is the first webinar in a series of webinars that we decided to come up with this year. The idea behind this one is that we would like to give a little bit more information on what's going on in the industry and also intertwine this with the Railway Management Certificate Program that is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And the idea behind this is to have professors uh, that teach in the program to contribute and provide a little bit more information on their particular subject. So today's webinar is definitely NS and the UP merger, but we have another one coming up in November 18th. There'll be with Lynn Kelly, author of the book Change Questions, that also presented our program in Module 1. With this, I would like to go over an agenda. And I think it's fundamental just to bring everyone up to speed and sort of align on the expectations. We understand we have a number of folks on this call who might be extremely familiar with the railway industry, and also there are participants who may be not as familiar with what's going on in North American railway industry. So we want to make sure that we provide fundamentals, we provide some additional context to what is going on in the Class 1 railway industry in US and in Canada, but also set that stage for what Jason will be sharing with you and at the later stage. The interesting fact is that the information is quite often available publicly. It's that it takes time to get down to those details and numbers, and that's what Jason will be doing today. So I'll be going over the merger at a glance, definitely the market implications, and then strategic supply chain considerations for the shippers, the stakeholders, the service providers, so anyone who is technically involved in the railway industry in one way or the other. So the quick overview, there are 6 Class 1 railroads in North America. And I'm specifically mentioning North American because it essentially Canada and US. There are 4 Class 1s in the US. There are 2 on the West Coast and 2 on the East Coast, essentially being divided by Mississippi River in between. There are 2 Class 1s in Canada. And if we look at the labels here at the bottom, you can see from left to the right there, Union Pacific and BNSF primarily on the west side of the U.S., CSX and NS on the east side of the U.S., and then we have 2 Class 1s in Canada, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway that I had a chance to work for. The interesting is that the two Canadian ones have a T-shaped sort of network. They cross Canada from east to west, but also go down to Gulf region in terms of, in case of CN, and in terms of CPKC down to Mexico. So quite an interesting network if you look at it from a perspective, how it all works together in North America. And what is interesting is that the class ones being defined by STB is railroad that is that's revenue is higher than 1,054,000,000 as of January 1st, 2024. So this is something to keep in mind as we're going to be talking about class ones interchangeably with Jason. With this, I would like to provide a quick snapshot of what the proposed merger between UP and NS looks like as of based on official information that was essentially published by them on July 29th. So if we look at this two class ones, UP is being one of the largest, NS being fourth based on the revenue in 2024. So number one and number four class one railroads have announced that they're going to be merging. Definitely, it's a long process. It's going to go over regulatory review, and there are a number of steps that we'll cover later in the presentation, but the statement has been made. And there has been a lot of conversations, official and unofficial statements and announcements with regards to this announced merger. The interesting fact that it's not all black and white. There are certain conversations that are happening behind the scene that controversial, but what we would like to do is to provide our opinion. We're not taking sides. We're using the publicly available information that Jason will be sharing to give you the tools and ability to make your own decisions and using the data that is available. Again, we're coming from a place of neutrality. Our idea here is to provide stakeholders, shippers, railroads with information that is readily available, but quite often hard to find. So if we look at the merger at a glance, a couple of items that I wanted to highlight based on my experience is that operational synergies that have been mentioned in that proposal is $2.75 billion. So what actually means this is the new business that will be generated as part of this merger. This is a significant uplift for any railroads. Another factor is that this merger will be reviewed based on the new STB rules as of 2001, following significant mergers and acquisition in 1970s that were essentially the result of those changes that have been made by STB. So this is interesting because essentially the commitment is to significantly grow the revenue. At the same time, the rules that will be applied to this merger by STB will be different than those that were applied to, for example, CP and KCS merger, because there was an exception to KCS case. So we'll see how it's going to be unfolding. With this, we would like to provide a little bit more information, and now we'll hand it over to Jason to give more details and his perspective.
So just to kind of open up here as we're just thinking about what this means to have, and Val, I'm going to use the term that you used yesterday when we were chatting, but this is, really creating almost, you can think, a super class one railroad with doing this. So this would be a truly unique entity. And yes, while you've got CPKC has very much talked about the fact that they are a Canadian, U.S., and into Mexico railroad, the scope of the connectivity across the United States with a UPNS is just something that we have never seen before. So if we take a look, kind of the key issues that Val highlighted in terms of some of those, proposed benefits, in terms of single line operations, not having to do handoffs, all of it, we'll talk a little bit later, what the CEO of UP has discussed about in specifics, but we're looking at potential for not needing to interchange in Chicago. We've got some more flexibility from a, let's say, Memphis standpoint. Where you will see a little bit as a gap, that shippers have certainly raised as the lesser coverage in, let's say, the state of Florida. That does create some interesting situations with UP, for example, needing to hand off to CSX. But we are looking at a railroad that has true national coverage, which again, one of the arguments that is being advanced for this will improve fluidity. We don't need to do interchanges. Let's say if we're going from, Oakland to, Philly, we've got containers that for some reason we're coming into the West Coast. We got to move them across the U.S., get them to Philly or get them to, let's say, Buffalo. We no longer need to do an interchange, let's say in Chicago. We can just go straight there. So that is really when we're talking, one source of operational efficiency. Then if we move to the next slide real quick, we'll sort of get a sense of what we are at from a, other railroad perspective. CPKC has said no further consolidation is needed in their view. And again, based on just simply publicly made statements, it is very safe to say that Burlington Northern Santa Fe has come out, essentially both hands swinging, opposing this merger. Again, saying it's costly, unnecessary, anti-competitive, and bad for the U.S. economy. And as they've highlighted, creating a super class one that has substantial control over many commodity categories. And if we look at the next slide in terms of what those commodity categories are, what I've done here is taken the 2024 rail car loadings data from the Surface Transportation Board that is compiled by the USDA through their Open Ag website. And what I've done is I've broken down 2024 market share based on where we would be at with UPNS. These are sorted in descending order by number of originated movements. So containers is by far the highest. So we're looking at both domestic and international intermodal containers. Right now, UPNS would have a 45.2% market share. BNSF then is going to be second at 34.2, and then CSX is a very distant third at this point at just 17%. Coal, BNSF is still the winner. Chemicals, this is one of those key sectors in terms of potential future railroad volume growth. UPNS would have a 54% market share. Again, BNSF does still have the majority of grain movements. A UPNS has majority of movement for crushed stone, sand, and gravel, and then as well as for originated motor vehicles and equipment, a 47% share. And so, not going to walk through every one of these, but what you can see is there is absolute truth to BNSF's observations that UPNS fixing market shares right where they were in 2024 is a railroad of unprecedented size with over 40% market share in the majority of commodity categories, and it will tend to be either number one or number two for every single commodity category, to the one exception of metallic ore movements in the U.S., where Canadian National has the vast majority of those up in Minnesota. But then if we look at the next slide, this is, for me, when I always am talking about railroad operations, to me, the most important slide to think about the broader macroeconomic trends to understand and think about this merger and put it in context. And so what I've done is taken the data from the Surface Transportation or from the U.S. Bureau of Transportation Statistics obtained through Fred, and I've annualized it to show rail carload movement in black, and then rail intermodal movement in red. Intermodal here is including both containers as well as truck trailers to pick up historically that there was substantially more trailer on flat car movement than we see today with the shift towards precision schedule railroading. And the key thing I want to stress is if you look back from 2000 till the global financial crisis, from 2000 to 2008, the real story is carload movement is over 16 million a year. And then from 2000 through 06, intermodal is, for lack of a better term, manna from heaven. This is an additional 3 million loads a year that are getting moved. So it's the class ones, you've got this substantial lock on the carload side, moving 16 to 17 million loads a year, and you get to add another 3 million. You're looking at 29 million movements a year in 2006. That is peak railroading activity that occurred. Ever since 2006, we have been on a secular trend towards fewer and fewer movements on aggregate. That has primarily been driven by a big drop in carload volume. And we'll talk in a minute in detail specifically, but this is essentially a linear function of coal mining activity that has been declining since 2006, 2007. Um, and so what we then get is after the global financial crisis, freight carload volume down to 14 to 15 million units a year. Then once we have natural gas getting unlocked by fracking and a big drop in prices in 15, 16, you see another million loads a year. Then you see with the COVID pandemic, we've lost another about 1.25 million carloads a year. Intermodal, in contrast, rebounded fairly well from the global financial crisis, but there's sort of been three peak periods that we've seen with intermodal, and that has been 18, and then 21, and then 24. The key thing to keep in mind here when you look at this, if you go back 20 years, railroad revenue was not as exposed to competition from the trucking sector. Clear reason being, in a lot of these carload commodities, there really is not effective truckload competition when you're looking at 200,000 pounds of freight per carload. From an intermodal side, that is completely not true. And so you now have to think moving forward, where are there growth opportunities going to be for the Class 1s? The answer, as far as I can see it, when you look at the secular trend in carload movement, the answer is unlikely carload. The answer, therefore, is intermodal. That then creates the question is, and this is an open question, we do not have the answer to it, are the potential synergies that Val mentioned going to be enough to really sort of unlock additional intermodal market share by shaving, let's say, one day off of a West Coast to East Coast transit? Versus are we facing a reality that as containerized imports have secularly grown over the last 25 years, it is now not nearly as common to fulfill demand on the East Coast from, let's say, China by importing through the West Coast and intermodaling across the US. Now the option is typically just import through the East Coast, and at that point you could have a intermodal movement, or it may just be truckload transportation if you're looking at, let's say, 500 miles or less. And then as we move to the next slide, I really want to kind of break down this intermodal piece, because I think this is the key as we think about stressing any competitive benefits from this merger. It is really a question of, can we unlock intermodal volume or additional latent intermodal volume? This is where I really want to highlight there's sort of three peak periods that we've seen, and this data is through July of this year. It's seasonally adjusted, going back all the way to 2000 for total intermodal. Those periods are 2018, the back half of 2020 into about the first half of 2021, and then late 2024 into the first quarter or so of 2025. But then let's think about the dynamics that were happening during each of these periods. During 2017 and 2018, you have a very, very, very strong truckload market. The strongest market that we had seen under normal conditions since the global financial crisis, and arguably since 2004 and 2005. That was driving up truckload rates. That was, all things equal, making intermodal a little bit more attractive than what it had been. In 2019, and I'll share more on the next slide, you saw railroads being fairly slow to lower their price for intermodal as truckload rates were coming down, and you saw almost 100,000 units a month lost. You also had a decline of imports in 2019, in part due to a front loading in 2018 because the US started to implement very large China tariffs in 2019. You have a plunge with COVID and then an incredible rebound. That is a unique period. And the reason for that you're seeing this massive spike up, you've got consumers at home, they've got a lot of money because of federal stimulus. They can't spend on services. So what are they doing? They're ordering furniture, they're ordering barbecue grills, they're ordering big bulky stuff for their houses. A lot of this comes from Asia. And because inventories have been drawn down so low because of how strong consumer spending was, there was a prioritization for using the West Coast in the back half of 2020 to get stuff to the US from China, from Vietnam, from South Korea as quickly as you could. Put it on rail, get it to Chicago, get it further east if need be, because that is going to be faster than the all-water route through the Panama Canal. So you had incredibly strong volume. You've got that big drop. For those wondering what that is, that's February 2021 polar vortex. We have all the disruptions in Texas. We have a big loss of intermodal moves. We get a big jump back up, and then the back half of 2021, we actually fall down. This was not due to demand for intermodal being low. This was instead because the Class 1's networks became so snarled, they were having to meter intermodal traffic, especially from the West Coast to Chicago, to Memphis, to St. Louis, etc. And what that was doing was it was causing very unreliable lead times. And so, given inventories again had been low, there were so many supply chain disruptions, there was a shifting over of freight to truck. That should have been the period where we saw 1.3 million loads a month. Like that chart should have reached an all-time high in the second half of 2021. A little bit of a bump up in 22, not as much. And that's the first half of the year, and then intermodal plunges. That plunge is because containerized imports are very weak in 2023. Back half of 22, first half of 23, they're very weak. We then start to see that upward climb again. It's because containerized imports are increasing. And so when you look at this data, you're starting to see a key pattern here. This is really about what is going on in the containerized importing part of the world. Truckload freight demand and U.S. manufacturing activity has not shown nearly these ebbs and flows over this period. So what you're really picking up is what's going on in the international space. That drop in 25 and then rebound, guess what? That drop is in May and June when we had seen dramatic decreases in imports from China due to the incredibly high tariffs. The July rebound is in large part because those tariffs have been paused. And so when I look at this and I think secular intermodal growth, to me the question is very simply, do we have what's containerized imports doing? That is where that is a much harder question to answer today, given where U.S. trade policy is at. It is quite unclear right now how much we will see of, let's say, reshoring of manufacturing activity versus how much will just be lost demand if imports cannot be brought in and consumers may not buy certain goods. But my general sense is this idea that you're going to unlock tremendous benefits and dramatically increase intermodal volumes. I look at the historical data and say that is, at first glance, challenging because I can see this ebb and flow is based so heavily on what is going on in just international intermodal volumes. And then if we look at the next slide to really sort of hammer home these pricing dynamics, the data on the left, this is the producer price index for rail intermodal. For any of you who would want to obtain these data, that call code that starts with PCU, that is the BLS's call code for that series from the PPI data. This is measuring what railroads are receiving for intermodal services. So this is not necessarily what shippers are paying because this is not what a shipper is paying JBH or Hub Group. This is what the railroads are receiving from JBH and Hub Group. The key thing is, and what I'm going to come back to and stress, there's ebbs and flows to this. And those ebbs and flows are going to be perfectly a function of where the truckload market is at. We can see that show up very well here from data from Journal of Commerce. I do their forecasting for their intermodal savings index. And so this is their contract truckload rate data, its pattern over time, and then contract intermodal rate data. So this is not a spot basis. This is shipper to service provider contract rate. So long term. What you'll end up seeing is that, hey, at the end of the day, intermodal rates that the intermodal marketing companies can charge, and therefore the rates that the class ones have the potential of seeing are really a function of what's going on in the truckload space. You need the truckload space to tighten for that revenue to go up. Right now through September, we were not really seeing much evidence of this. I will tell you there's continual discussion in the truckload market that things are going to tighten soon. We've been hearing that things will tighten soon dynamics since Q2 of 2023. From an overall macroeconomic standpoint, I don't see anything happening that's much exciting for the next 6 months, and we can see that play out. But this is the key thing I want to hammer home as we think about what the railroads are facing right now. Their revenue potential, if you start saying that it is tied more to intermodal than ever before, you then recognize intermodal pricing. This is not something where there's market power that the class ones have. Their pricing dynamics are set by what's going on in the truckload sector, which is a monopolistic competition with what we would say is an incredibly high substitution factor. It's not perfectly competitive, but it is about as close to it as you can get. Now, as we move forward here and kind of again set the picture on the carload side, this is just hammering home that big drop in carload volume that we've seen. And what I want to stress is these have been drops that have been very sudden. This has not been like a gradual, steady decline. It looks like a plateau or almost a terrace where it's flat, big drop, then flat, big drop, flat, big drop. And if we take a look at what's driving this here, if we can go to the next slide, it's going to be coal. Now, believe it or not, coal mining is still the biggest source of carload originated movements at almost 3 million carloads a year in 2024. Chemicals was next at a little bit below 2 million. You've got grain, crushed sand and gravel, motor vehicles and equipment, metallic ores, petroleum products. Now, if you take a look at something like petroleum, peak petroleum movement was back in 2014 before we had a lot of the pipelines built to essentially handle a lot of the output from the various oil drilling regions. So again, as we start thinking long term, and even when we compare back to 2018, which is what the next slide should do here, and start thinking, okay, long-term growth potential. If we take a look here, comparing 2024 versus 2018, carload is down, mostly due to coal. Almost 1.4 million carloads a year less of coal. So if you think about that number was almost 3 million in 2024, that means it's about 4.4 million carloads in 2018. Crushed stone, sand, and gravel is down from where it was. Reason for that? Less fracking activity. And also fracking continuing the shift towards more local, essentially sources of sand. We also have a situation where housing activity was fairly slow in 2024. That means less things like construction sand, which means less cement and whatnot. Metals were down because we're not making as much primary metal as what we were in 2018. Motor vehicles and equipment are down because we're not assembling as many cars as we were in 2018, 2019. If we go all the way over, we see where there's some growth. In general, it was fairly limited. So a little bit for food and kindred product, a little bit of grain mill products, so finished foods, and then the biggest gainer was chemicals. Again, secularly, is there something a merger can do that is going to unlock a lot of carload volume? I tend not to see what that is. because one extra day of efficiency is not going to cause a shipper moving, let's say, metals. They're currently taking 4 to 5 truckloads. That one extra day of efficiency doesn't cause somebody to say, you know what, I'm going to shift over to the carload piece. They have decided for whatever reason, be it customers only need 40,000 pounds of goods, they don't need 160 to 200,000. They're not going to do that transition just as easily. And as then we shift into the next slide, again, sort of thinking about this, this is the brutal reality the Class 1s face. This is coal mining back to the 1980s. Coal mining activity is almost assuredly not going to go back to where it was in 2017 or 2018. And there is not a chance it goes back to where it was in 2006. And so this is where, from a carload standpoint, we have passed peak carload. We will not get to 17 million carloads a year. That number is long gone. We can essentially forever forget about that. So then the question really, I think, is turning to the minds of, folks, how can we essentially maximize our efficiency out of our existing market structure and our market shares that we have, recognizing that from at least a carload side, total carloads across the Class 1s will never get back to 2005, 2006 levels. Not with coal mining where it's at, and not with any promise of a big secular revitalization taking place. Now, as we move forward then here and thinking about things, from a revenue standpoint, carload pricing is completely different. You can assume each year, if you're a carload shipper, it's going to go up 3 to 5%, barring massive declines in energy prices like we saw in 2015, 2016. It's essentially under normal times, 3 to 5%. That is what you're going to see each and every year in terms of pricing increases. You'll notice very quickly, and as we get into sort of some of the shipper sentiments and the railroad and whatnot in the next couple slides, you'll start to see, especially this carload side, this is where the severe concerns are existing with this merger. So if we look at the next slide, in terms of the intermodal implications, so this is pulling from an article from Trains and then some observations from a friend of mine, Larry Gross, one of the best intermodal analysts in the business. Larry's forgotten more than what I will ever know about intermodal, so shout out to Larry here. But if we take a look here, JBH is very interesting because it's BNSF, exclusively western part of the country, and then mostly Norfolk Southern in the east. They do use CSX for where NS doesn't have service. So again, big example of that into Florida. This is, I think, a wild card because I personally don't know whether JBH is going to want to continue on as much with Norfolk Southern with this new structure. So CSX, I think, has the potential to pick up a lot of JBH's business, at least where they have overlap with Norfolk Southern's essentially trackage. Schneider and STG Logistics find themselves on the reverse side of this. So Schneider's the third largest intermodal marketing provider. The expectation is that they will likely shift over to NS if a merger happens, simply because they left BNSF a couple years ago. They were not very happy with being essentially second priority to JBH, with JBH being by far the largest intermodal provider. So that's likely to be a pickup for NS there because they'll stick with UP. The expectation as well is STG may shift over to NS. End of the day, this is sort of likely an intermodal volume washout by the time we sort of factor everything in. Hub Group is right now already on the UP-NS structure, so that will be something that we would expect them to be, if this merger goes through, in the best position, at least initially, while the other providers try to figure out what exactly it is they want to do in terms of getting rail capacity. Another open question right now is the UPCSX UMAX container pool. Larry's view is that that will likely go away. So, in other words, if you're an intermodal marketing company out there and you do not have your own containers, you are going to be at a disadvantage. Especially challenging getting containers right now, unless you can get them already here, is that's one of the things that's going to be tariffed at very high rates because most of those containers come from China and are made of steel poured in China. So purchasing new containers right now is not necessarily attractive. JBH going all in like they did a few years ago and buying so many containers certainly may end up, if these tariffs stay in place, having been a long-term forward buying benefit that we did not know of at the time. Now, if we take a look then at sort of what the some of the other statements have been here real quick, specifically UP's perspective, this is quoting from an article from JOC Inland from Journal of Commerce. So Jim Vena just provided an example. The arguments have been you're looking at basically, in Chicago as an example, 1,000 drayage moves shift off of the roads because you can have a straight line service from West Coast, or I should say from the west to the east. You do the math there, that's like 4 or 5 trains a day, give or take, in terms of volume. And so again, the other argument is that by having essentially the need to not interchange, we can now spread volume across more terminals, maybe include improved network fluidity a little bit. The statements have been made that UMAX will remain, so that is open question. And then the one statement that is being made by both of the, or at least certainly by UP, I don't want to speak for NS, but Mr. Vena basically said, look, we're going to do what's best for our shippers in terms of what gives them the best or fastest route. So, for example, if you need to go from the West Coast to Florida, you're going to move by CSX down through Louisiana and whatnot. So that is the statements being made, is that even if there's a merger, there will still be handoffs. UP would still potentially hand off to CSX, which would obviously be its, giving business to its the rival of its other division, for lack of a better term. Now, that's sort of the intermodal providers have been fairly quiet. Now, the carload shippers, on the other hand, they've been a little bit more blunt. And I would say strong opposition is a very nice way we could say it. So, for example, the chemical sector has expressed very strong reservations about this proposed merger. So, for example, in sort of that Kansas City, Chicago, St. Louis area, whereas Val put up at the start, there's quite a bit of overlap between the networks at the moment. You may see that decline just to one. So, in other words, what you're having shippers become locked in. And obviously that raises concerns about substantial price increases because, again, for those carload goods, it's just not feasible to shift over to truckload of any type. The chemical folks have also expressed substantial concerns over service failures that, for example, have occurred after other mergers, most recent being CPKC. There's been concerns with that. No, I am the pro bono chief economist for the Private Railcar Food and Beverage Association. So I just spoke at their semi-annual event 2 weeks ago. And so I did a little poll of the room and asked how many folks in that room were supportive of this merger. And I got crickets, right, for lack of a better term. And so I will say the carload shippers seem to be expressing very, very, very strong concerns with this. I'm not hearing much conversation that they're anticipating these proposed benefits in terms of service improvement or straight line service are going to necessarily materialize. So I think it is safe to say that the carload shipper community has severe reservations in terms of what we're seeing publicly said, what I've heard said to me through my interactions with folks in industry. And so as we move ahead, I think it is time for me to pass it back to Val.
Thank you, Jason. As I've been listening to you, there was a number of questions that, as you pointed out, they're unclear at this time. There's no clear answer. Definitely, time will tell us. I think the best way to going forward is to watch out the dynamics and what is going to be the process in terms of evaluation and an application and how it's going to play out in a 2026. Because if we look at this from a perspective of the timeline, we're sort of just over that first step when STB essentially finished collecting the public comments that was concluded on October 16th. I haven't seen anything yet, but I hope that will be shared and we will have some sort of a glimpse of what the feedback from public was. The interesting is that the next step will be essentially in January when official application will have to be submitted to STB for review, and then STB will have 30 days to review that application, either say yay or no. And if it is yay, then essentially that will commence the review process for STB, a comprehensive review that will essentially take most of the time in 2026. If no, then essentially both UP and NS will have to provide additional information based on the feedback provided by STB. So essentially, if we look at this from a perspective of timeline, it will take most of the time next year in 2026 before that conclusion will be made, which is expected to be by the end of 2026. So essentially, next year, the 2026 will be really interesting to watch and follow as the story unfolds in terms of application, the review, and the public comments. Based on my experience, it's definitely a very exciting process, but also it's very time consuming for all the stakeholders involved, and quite often railroads reach out to shippers and different stakeholders to provide their feedback and support or oppose. So we'll see how it's going to unfold. Something tells me there's going to be quite a number of news statements and publications over the next 12 months with regards to this merger. So definitely something to watch for and learn from in 2026. I wanted to also highlight that we'll have a poll, as Jason mentioned that he asked that question in one of the recent meetings. So what are we going to do? We're going to ask a number of questions at the end of this presentation to hear your feedback on a number of questions related to the merger. But I wanted to highlight that this webinar and the series of webinars is supported by the Railway Management Certificate Program, the program that actually starts the next year. Program starts in April and consists of 4 modules. It's been running for the last 18 years, and it's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. The program is aimed at the leaders of the railway management and the railway industry, and essentially has been a success story for the last several years as we've been growing in terms of number of participants and geographical scope. To give you a perspective of who usually attends our program this year, we've got 41 participants from short lines, regional railroads across 27 different organizations, 19 states, and 2 countries. So essentially, we've covered US and Mexico this year. I look forward towards next year, and hopefully we'll see some Canadian representatives on the program as well. Other programs that we have at Michigan State are listed here. One of them is railway management, but we have others that are being supported by EDP, Executive Development Program. And with this, I would like to transition to the poll. And if you don't mind, I would like to ask you 5 questions. So it looks like we've got time, and then we'll actually show you the results. So I'd like to start with the first question. And you should see a poll with 4 different questions. So let's take some time and see what the results will be. But it's interesting because we've got quite a number of participants today. That'll be interesting to see what the poll will be. So the first question is, how familiar are you with the proposed UP-NS merger? The numbers are coming up. So let's give 10 more seconds before we conclude on the first question. 5 seconds. All right, we're closing the poll. Okay, I'm sharing the results. You should see them somewhere here on the screen, but I will go over. The majority of the folks actually indicated somewhat familiar, 56%. That's a good number. Very familiar, 36%. Then we've got just heard about it, 5%, and then never heard of that, 4%. What an interesting. So the two biggest buckets are either somewhat familiar or they're familiar, which looks like the folks that we've got today on the call are quite familiar with the subject. All right, let's go to the next one. All right. Let me know if you can see the second question. I don't believe it's coming up. All right, let's go to the third one. I stopped sharing the first question, so that was the reason why I was not allowing me the second question. So let's start with the second question. I'm launching the poll. What aspect of the merger do you expect to impact your operations the most? Let's give it a minute. Oh, this is interesting. All right. Let's give it 10 more seconds. 5 seconds. All right, looks like we've got most of the answers. Okay. Let me end the poll and share the results. Interesting. The two largest buckets are regulatory and competitive dynamics and pricing and rate structures. That's where Jason spent a lot of time presenting and explaining the dynamics behind. So definitely, we are very much aligned there. Definitely then comes the 12% transit times and routing. Okay, let me just highlight the regulatory. The largest bucket is regulatory and competitive dynamics, 46%. Pricing and rate structures, 32%. Then comes transit times and routing, 12. And the last one is intermodal service expansion, 10%. All right, let's go to the third one. Question 3. How likely are you to adjust your supply chain strategy in response to this merger? There is definitely a winner. All right, 10 more seconds. I'm clicking end the poll. Let's see what the numbers look like. Share the results. So the biggest one is too early to tell, 52%. And I would agree with you. We're definitely in the early stage of a proposed merger. It hasn't been even filed yet. There's an intention to merge. Definitely a lot of details are just unknown. Like with any other merger, we'll have to look into the document, the filing that will provide more details on what the merger will look like. So far, we have high-level statements that are definitely supportive of the merger, which makes sense because they're being proposed by UP and NS. The second bucket, 22%, is somewhat likely, so there is some expectation that the adjustments will have to take place. Very likely is 14% and not likely 11%. All right, let's go to the next one. The two more questions. Question number 4. Do you believe the merger will create more opportunities for rail workforce and local economies? All right, we've got 3 answers. Yes, no, not sure. And we have a number of questions here in the chat. We'll take them once we're done with the poll. I can see 2 questions pending. All right. Poll is pretty active, so let's give 10 more seconds. Jason, I see that you're typing an answer. Thank you. All right, 5 more seconds. And I'm pretty low on seconds here today. All right, we're going to end the poll. Take a look at the answers. I'm sharing the results with you. Interesting. So 85% of the participants and responders indicated that there will be no new opportunities, no more opportunities for rail workforce and local economies. Interesting. Again, we are not forcing this in any way. We're not taking sides. We're just collecting data. So 85% said no. Then we have 8% not sure and 7% saying yes. What an interesting feedback. It's essentially no is dominating here. Okay, stop sharing and on to the last question. The question number 5. Do you expect the Surface Transportation Board, aka STB, to approve the merger without major conditions? Ten more seconds. 5. All right, finishing that last question, Paul. All right, and sharing the results. So you should see them here on the screen. Do you expect the Surface Transportation Board to approve without major conditions? 45% say yes, 42 say no answers, and 14. So we're sort of even here between yes and no. Interesting that we're essentially almost even here. 45 yes, 42 no. All right. Thank you for staying active and giving your answers. That definitely helps to get an idea of what the stakeholders think about the upcoming merger. I would like to move on to the question session because essentially that was the last slide, and we have a number of questions here. Jason, let's give it a shot and try to answer some of those. So we've got Enrique. What conditions do you think the STB would impose to approve the merger? Can they force them to sell the 26% stake in Ferromex? That's a really good question. If you ask me at this time, I would say, given the fact that we haven't seen the official filing yet, just a proposal, there can be any sort of conditions imposed. Based on my experience with CPKC, there were a number of conditions that were imposed on CP and KCS as they were going through the approval process. So that very much can be the case. Again, I don't want to say yes or no. I don't have a crystal ball. But Jason, if you have a different opinion, let me know. But that's my answer to this one at this time. We can't hear you, Jason. You're probably muted.
How about now?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah. No, I can't speak specifically to the Ferromex situation. So
Okay.
you answered it better than I could have.
All right. Thank you, Jason. All right. Here's another question. UP has stated that they will make their money back on the cost of the merger by operational improvements, which don't involve workforce reductions. How likely is this? Seems to me that they would make their money back by rate increases. Jason, why don't you take this one first, and then I will provide my opinion.
So on the rate increase side, I mean, I think folks expressed it well with the poll question, where that was really, almost kind of the big central theme was, concerns about where rates are going to be at. Just looking right now in terms of total employment and rail transportation, and this is all rail activities, but this is going to be mostly the class ones. We've actually seen headcounts decline across all of rail freight from about 158,000 in March down to 153,000. Or so we've already seen more recently about a 4,000 payroll drop. If we take a look, payroll have been as high as 184,000 back in 2018. So even if it doesn't involve significant reductions, I would think that there would be some consolidation from a corporate standpoint, because there has to be some role redundancy. But I think again the big thing is on that carload side, it's this merger does nothing to make the carload space more competitive. On the intermodal side, if you know, I'm again skeptical that you can somehow gain enough additional new market share that this becomes more profitable from essentially a we're stealing from trucks rail increase. So I would imagine it would again be something that would provide some more pricing power, that would be a benefit to the railroad and not necessarily a benefit to the uh, the shipper community, especially the carload shippers.
Well said, Jason. And I was about to refer that poll where literally the participants indicated made it absolutely clear with the 85% voting. So I think that was the answer to the question um, to a significant extent. Thank you. Moving on to the next one. Excellent presentation. Uh, we've got a question from anonymous participant. I can't see who it is, but how can anyone believe that this merger will not go through with them already terminating the only no vote from the STB review of the CPKC? Good question. I don't have an answer exactly. There are different stakeholders being involved in this. Definitely too early to say. Would it go or not? I don't know. Definitely, there are certain moves that are being made that probably will help to get this merger through. But again, it's just too early to say or be sure how it's going to unfold in 2026. Personally, I haven't even seen the filing yet, just to understand what is actually in it. So far, it's been just a public, more of a generic statements supporting the merger from UPNS and opposition coming from two class ones, primarily BNSF and CPKC. Jason, anything on that?
Um, not not really. I mean, I again we'll see how it plays out. I think this is one where it's going to be incumbent upon the shipper community, if they're opposed to it, to be very as vociferous as possible during the review process, to express that, because that's the only way, you know, this will not happen at that point.
Hey, there's the next question from Ben Stanley. And I think that'll be the last question because we're at the end of the hour. The Ben is asking, how do you think the merger will impact the railway tie industry in terms of overall procurement or different types of ties, non-hardwood? I don't have a clear answer to that one, but if we look at this from a perspective of mergers, the two class ones will be merging. There will be some adjustments to the network, so that might be some additional procurement that will be involved in terms of adjustment to the network. To what extent, hard to say. Again, we're at the very early stage, but I would say there will be some adjustments to the procurement just because the two railroads, the number one UP and number four, based on revenue, will we make some adjustments? Would it have some drastic impact across the industry? I would say probably not. But definitely there will be some changes based on what the two railroads will do if that merger goes through. There's a lot of ifs at that time. So with this, I would like to conclude because we are exactly at 1 hour p.m. Eastern time. We promise to be on time. We're trying to be like railroads, striving to be on time. With this, I would like to thank everyone. It's been an amazing journey. Thank you, Jason, for your contribution, for sharing the information and being a great supporter of the Railroad Management Certificate Program.